Good afternoon, and welcome to this session, Artificial Intelligence Standards and Trust. I am Tim McGarr, Sector Lead for Digital at BSI, and for this session, I am joined by Sahar Dinesh, Senior Government Engagement Manager at BSI, and Rebecca Ansel-Meti, Senior Policy Advisor and AI Standards Lead at DCMS, the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Before we start, I should mention there is an error on the agenda. This session will not last 90 minutes as advertised. Instead, we expect to have the session wrapped up in less than an hour. In terms of what we plan to cover, I will shortly hand over to Sahar, who will cover AI standards, delivering global leadership and trust. Then I'll provide an update on the Artificial Intelligence Committee and the Artificial Intelligence Management System Standard, which is out for public comment. Then Rebecca will cover AI governance and standards, a pro-innovation approach. We'll finish with questions. Please submit your questions as we go in the Q&A via the Q&A function, and please keep your questions as clear and concise as possible. It really helps us out. I will now hand over to Sahar.
Thanks, Tim, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session. As Tim notes, I'm Sahar Dinesh. I'm Senior Government Engagement Manager at BSI, and I work in the Standards Policy team. So I am setting the scene really about the role of standards in delivering global leadership and trust, and we'll touch on a few of the activities in this space, including the AI Standards Hub. Next slide, please. So I know that there is a wide audience joining us today. So for some of you, this might be really familiar. This is the landscape of the global SDOs that BSI, as the UK's national standards body, leads UK voices into. So this is really a demonstration of the role that international standards play and the role that we try to play in influencing global standards and making sure that UK voices are heard within these international standards organisations. So ISO and IEC are international standards organisations. IEC is the electrotechnical equivalent. In some cases, especially within the space of AI, they work very collaboratively together because it covers so many areas. In addition to those, BSI is members of the regional standards organizations in Europe, CEN and CENELEC, and we participate and influence the standards in those SDOs as well. In addition, we also support DCMS in their participation of ITU, the International Telecoms Union, which is a UN member organization, and really help to shape those global standards and resolutions and create alignment between these three very influential global SDOs. And BSI is also a member of ETSI, the European Telecoms Standards Institution, and we are the NSO members there, so we can help shape the direction of the standards in those space. And the reason this is interesting and useful for setting the scene is that primarily we focus on international standards. 95% of the UK's national catalogue are international standards. This is something that our stakeholders want, and this is something that we see helps create UK leadership within the international standard space. Next slide, please, Tim. So what is really the role of the national standards body in this space? So what we do is really we are appointed by the UK government, and we are responsible for maintaining the infrastructure to make sure that UK experts can influence and create these international standards with their requirements in mind. We create the landscape for these international standards, but it's the experts that write them, and we make sure that the processes are in place to give them the strength and the voice to be able to influence these international standards. The standards that we create within these formal SDOs cover the sort of the main requirements of the WTO international standards principles, and that's hugely beneficial when the standards get utilized within international trade or are getting discussed within international trade agreements. So that gives us an added advantage to make sure that we're influencing standards that are fundamental in interoperability and trade between nations. The principles that we follow are making sure that there is multi-stakeholder and full stakeholder engagement in the standards. So the standards are not created by one sector or one industry. They are fundamentally created by different sectors and different stakeholder groups. And they are developed through consensus of decision amongst those stakeholder groups. And any standard, international, UK, or even a fast track one, has that open public consultation phase to make sure that all voices can incorporate within the standard and can help shape what good can look like in that space. Next slide, please, Tim. So what do we mean by multi-stakeholder? It's fundamental of a multi-stakeholder landscape is to make sure that there are a variety of voices. And this enables us to create a trusted system. There isn't one voice that is influencing the shape of these standards, but it is all these different stakeholders. The standards users have a voice, as well as the standards makers, as well as the industry, and as well as those new entrants into the market. So this is just a snapshot of any sort of, whenever we are creating a new standard, the stakeholder groups that we reach out to. And it's really valuable to note the huge role that government and regulators play in shaping these standards, because these standards also enable policymakers and can help support their work, as we'll hear more going forward. But a huge part of this also, these stakeholder groups, is the consumer voice. So I can speak a little bit more about how their voice impacts trust. Next slide, please, Tim. So BSI has an independent consumer organization called CPIN, and the CPIN mission really is to empower and protect consumers and enable them to have that voice in these international standards that we're creating. The network is a group of experts that have been trained specifically to be that voice of consumer, and they provide oversight and governance into international consumer forums. But more specifically, their voice is invaluable in these sectors, especially around emerging technologies like AI, to make sure that the user's voice is not forgotten and that there are ethical and practical considerations when the standards are being shaped. And fundamentally, the consumer groups do that and help us to create a much more legitimate and trusted system. There'll be more discussions within the Standards Conference around the role of consumers. And I know that the Nikki Stopford, BSI Consumer Forum Chair, will be speaking at the panel session tomorrow. So do stop in and listen to that if of interest. Next slide, please, Tim. So we spoke a little bit about the consumers and the sort of role of government, but I think the biggest part here is to make sure that there is that variety within industry as well. So all the multi-stakeholder participations enables a trusted system so that there isn't just one industry voice that's influencing what goes into these international standards. That means that the system is created to prevent bias being inputted into the standard, and so that those voices, those multi-stakeholder voices, help to identify if there is bias or if there is situations that means that industry and new entrants may not be able to come in, or that the system doesn't enable trust. These real key principles of open consultation and multi-stakeholder participation enables the trust to be built into the system. But of course, the transparency and independence is a huge part of enabling trust within a standard system. Having those standards that are always there to be reviewed and to be discussed. Each standard will get assessed after a few years, specifically to make sure that that trust and independence is maintained and that transparency is there for everyone to discuss and review. And these processes are what give businesses, governments, regulators, and consumers the confidence that the standard they're using is from a trusted source. Next slide, please. This is a huge landscape of where the digital standard system is at the moment. We have huge amounts of committee activity within these areas, and the UK is setting the sort of the UK position and the voice within all these areas. It's a huge breadth, as you can see, and this also helps us to look more horizontally across areas. And to explore where we can have shared best practice and lessons learned between these areas. I won't go too much into detail of all of these, but they're all information is available on our website, or do reach out to us if you're interested in any of the other areas. But today, as we know, we're focusing primarily on AI and the AI standards work. Next slide, please, Tim. So really, when it comes to global leadership, the UK has a really strong voice within this sector. We, in general, participate in quite a lot of international technical committees within ISO. We're one of the strongest international participants in this area. And Tim will speak a little bit more about the committee activity that's happening currently in this space. But also, I think it's really useful to highlight that once the UK sometimes creates a standard based around what our UK requirements are, we see so much of that being pushed into the international space. And that really sets our position as global leaders within the international standards fora. And a lot of those international business standards originated from the UK and from UK best practice. And again, we will speak again about this going forward, how we want to influence and lead on international best practice around business management in AI. But in addition to the formal standards work, we do speak a little bit about the communities and consortia as well. And we want to be leaders in shaping and bringing experts together as well. So I've just really quickly touched on Oceanus. And if you haven't heard about Oceanus, do explore it more. It is a really interesting forum that was founded by BSI and includes multiple SDOs, standards development organizations, and national standards bodies. It's not a standards making entity, but it's a forum for discussion and collaboration on the standards that are already out there around ethical autonomy and intelligent systems, which are fundamental in the direction we want to go. It is, again, a community of standards developers in this vital area. Next slide, please. So that takes me really nicely to the AI Standards Hub. This also is a huge new activity that is really influential and is really interesting and just at its early stages. I will leave sort of the more detailed discussions about how this what came about and how it was considered at the beginning to Rebecca at DCMS later. But I would just quickly note the valuable position that this creates within the UK of creating a forum, this really great community of standards bodies, but also of UK experts within the AI standards space that can help unlock the potential of standards going forward in AI. The AI Standards Hub is a partnership between the Alan Turing Institute, BSI, NPL, the National Physical Laboratory, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and the Office for AI. And it is really an online platform that can help bring together standards makers, standards users, and those who want to just understand how standards can help them together into one accessible forum. It helps with the increased visibility of standards, and it informs users of what else is out there in terms of learning capabilities and global interesting white papers and policy documents. It focuses primarily on the formal SDOs. However, it touches really broadly on all the standards that are being developed across the landscape of AI and AI activities. We're at the pilot stage of this, and we are right at the beginning. So we would really welcome more participation and involvement within the hub as we go forward. And I will put the link to the hub into the chat further down the presentation. Next slide, please, Tim. So far, what have we done within the AI Standards Hub? Well, I think the key part has been to bring together key stakeholder groups that maybe haven't really engaged with standards as much or are interested in engaging further into them to understand the challenges they face and the benefits that standards can bring to their work. So the wider survey so far we've carried out has been with different stakeholder groups and roundtables. So there's been large companies, large humans, startups, SMEs, regulators, civil society and consumers, and active SEO participation. Next slide, please. So these workshops and roundtables really help set up our findings for shaping the pilot of the AI Standards Hub. I think we came to the realization that most industry, most participants, and most groups understood that standards are really important around this space and also the value that they can bring to their work, but they didn't have that understanding of how they can engage, how they can use them, and which standards are more beneficial to them. And I think that lack of understanding and capability gap was a really important finding that shaped what the AI Hub is here to do. So the plan is to help enhance capabilities through a lot of the sections and e-learnings that we'll go through. Another key finding was, how can we make sure that more participants can understand how they can get involved in shaping these standards and the sort of the understanding of how a lot of these standards are being made, and enable them to see and scrutinize, but also to see that it is a trusted and transparent system. So it's a forum to help demonstrate those processes, but to show how people can get more involved. And then it's around skills and how capabilities can be increased by using standards, how these standards can be accessed, how they can be implemented, and how they can help individual organizations. Next slide, please. So the standards, excuse me, the AI Standards Hub has 4 key pillars. The observatory is there to help navigate the standards landscape. It has search function to help users access and search for standards that may be of interest to them. The second key pillar, and this is really the fundamental of what this AI Standards Hub is here to do, is to create a community and a collaboration forum to allow organizations to connect and to ideas to be exchanged and identify where standards are being used and where there is a need for new standards. And that really community is fundamental for everyone to participate and feel that they have a voice to bring. There's also a knowledge and training strand, which will enable e-learning and in-person training sessions. So that is there for everyone to access. And a research and analysis strand that focuses on policy and international research that's been carried out on AI standards and the way that standards are being used and utilized. With that, I'm going to hand over to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sahar. So I just want to add one more thing about the AI Standards Hub before I talk about some of the standardization. So one of the things for those of you that read anything about AI, the key thing that keeps coming out is about the importance of trustworthiness. And within the pilot phase that Sahar mentioned, trustworthiness is a key topic. So over the coming months, the 3 partners are going to look at different topics around trustworthiness. So BSI is going to do a deeper dive into resilience, security and safety. MPL is going to be looking at uncertainty, and the Turing Institute is going to be looking at explainability. And obviously we'll all be working together on those topics. So I just wanted to provide a little more depth on the topic of resilience, security and safety to try and encourage you to get involved in all three of these themes, because we want to get a lot of work going between now and March. So artificial intelligence, like many new technologies, raises new challenges to existing areas. And one of the reasons why we chose to pick these three topics in terms of BSI was there's already a huge amount of standardization that exists across the board. So in terms of resilience, there is established standardization in risk management, business continuity, and organizational resilience that helps organizations to survive and thrive. In terms of security, there's over 30 years of cybersecurity standardization, which has been helping to protect organizations and economies. In terms of safety, product safety is obviously very important to keep consumers safe, but safety is also an important element to much of the regulation that's coming through around AI, both in the UK, the EU, and elsewhere. So to give you an idea of some of the things we might be looking at over the coming months and how that might fit into some of the work you're interested in doing. So in terms of resilience, very shortly, there's going to be a new ISO/IEC standard published on risk management in AI. There's much more that needs to be done, and really to ensure that AI is incorporated into really thinking about the resilience of AI itself. So how can a model deal with unexpected data? How can a model deal with being manipulated, and how can it continue to be accurate over time? In terms of security, the global cost of cybercrime is estimated to be $6 trillion in 2021 and is growing at about 15% a year. So cyber criminals are extremely innovative, and AI is one of the many tools you already use to make their attacks more sophisticated. Hence, it's critical that AI is used to combat cybercrime. And how can we best deploy that in organizations, and how, as AI becomes more critical to organizations, can you protect your models, because it could become the key intellectual property an organization has. Equally around safety, we've had consumer safety as a key topic for many, many decades now. And lots of things around risk management, risk assessment and liability are quite settled. AI is going to shake this all up and bring in new challenges. So in terms of what we're planning to do in BSI, over the coming months, we're talking a lot about these subjects, and we wanted to really sort of hear your views on it. So you're going to speak to various people via market research up to the end of this year, do a validation workshop in January, and then bring out the full results on the AI Standards Hub in February next year. But my real call out to you online is, if you have experience in the implementation of AI, with specifically around the trustworthiness things mentioned, so security, safety, resilience, explainability, uncertainty, we really want to hear from you. We really want to have your views fed in to make sure we're doing the right work. So in terms of the committee work that's going on, so BSI's Artificial Intelligence Committee is known by the designation of ART1. So the committee brings together the relevant stakeholder groups that Sahar mentioned earlier, so SMEs, regulators, government, academia, trade body, businesses, and others. And again, as Sahar mentioned, the main focus of this work is international, towards SC42, the ISO/IEC committee under JTC1 that's developing international standards. But the BSI committee also mirrors the work of CEN/CENELEC JTC21, which adopts ISO/IEC standards for CEN/CENELEC, and also focus on producing standardization deliverables that address European market and societal needs, as well as underpinning EU legislation, policies, principles, and values. I know within the audience there are many of you who are involved in standardization. As I'll come to shortly, the majority of standards in AI currently cross-cutting across all sectors. But as time goes on, AI will be more important across the majority of standardization. For some committees, the standardization and development is already impacted by AI, and they are working to address it. Over time, this will affect many more committees, potentially all of them. The reason for sharing these committee designations is so that you know where the AI expertise sits within the committee structure. In terms of what's going on around the AI standardization, the work has been going on since 2018 and is still progressing and still evolving, as this is a rapidly changing subject. What is on the slide reflects an overview of some of the standardizations out in development. As those of you involved in standardization will know, an important place to start with any new topic is foundational standards. This means that those in the market and standards makers themselves know what they're talking about and agree on the same terms, hence the need to start with terminology and concept standards. In terms of the work that's going on around AI standardization, you can be seen as looking at both the challenges that can be considered from a technical point of view and both an organizational point of view. And both are really important for the adoption of AI. So much of artificial intelligence is very much data-centric, and quote the old acronym in IT, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and hence data quality is extremely important to ensure reliable outcomes. But equally, the choice of model and how you use that model is very important too. So having best practice on the quality of the model is very important for standardization. And once the AI has been completed, how do you ensure it's tested? So again, verifying what you've done. So taking it more from an organizational perspective, given the importance of AI in terms of the economic output of a firm, its reputation and its impact, it's right that the governance is in place. Hence, having standards around the governance of AI is essential for organizations, and that goes right up to the board of directors. Equally, as I mentioned, we'll very shortly have an artificial intelligence risk management standard. This is going to be based on the very widely used ISO 31000 standard, which is widely used by boards to ensure they're looking at the right risks and treating them appropriately. In the next slide, I'll cover the AI management system, and the impact assessment standards also closely aligned to that. Now, one of the things about all of these, both from an organizational perspective and a technical perspective, is building trust into AI. And you have to basically trust the approach the organization is taking and the organization itself. And AI has huge economic and societal benefits for all countries. To make sure that benefit is realized, you need to trust it. Equally, going down deeper into the trustworthiness topic, there's standardization on key areas of trust from this, like bias and explainability. So finally, I want to talk briefly about ISO IEC 42001, which is the forthcoming management system standard for artificial intelligence. So for those that don't know, management system standards help organizations to put a whole system in place. The AI management system standard will ensure organizations build AI into strategy, policy, processes, and other parts of their organization, something that's key for organizations to maximize the value from AI. As with other management system standards, ISO IEC 42001 is based on the circular process of establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving AI. This circular approach is especially important in a topic like AI, which goes at a huge pace and can have huge impact. It is anticipated that ISO IEC 42001 will have the same impact as other management system standards, such as ISO 9001 in quality management, ISO 14001 in environmental management, or ISO IEC 27001 in cybersecurity. So one of the reasons why I wanted to flag it is that the standard itself has just gone up for public comment, and we're really keen to get your views fed into it now. The URL is included on the screen, but I'll also put it into the chat as well. I will now hand over to Rebecca to talk more about AI governance standards, a pro-innovation approach. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim and Sahar. And hello, everyone. Very nice to have you here this afternoon. As it was mentioned in the beginning, my name is Rebecca Anselmetti. I'm a senior policy advisor in the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport within the UK government, where I lead the AI standards policy portfolio, which includes delivering on some of the commitments that we made in the National AI Strategy, which was published last September, such as the delivery of the UK AI Standards Hub, which we're working very closely on together with BSI, the National Physical Laboratory, and the Alan Turing Institute. But also we're supporting our colleagues across government to think about how we govern AI effectively and what role technical standards can play into that. So next slide, please, Tim. I just wanted to start with a quick overview of what approach the UK is taking to AI standards, and also what are some of the strategies and strategic framework that informed this approach. Next slide, please, Tim. So first of all, in the National AI Strategy, when we published that last year, the UK government set out its commitment to make sure that AI standards can be seen as tools to play a key role in how we govern AI in the UK. And this is because technical standards can provide robust specifications and processes for realizing some of the characteristics of trustworthy AI, such as safety, fairness, transparency, while also ensuring that there is global interoperability in AI products and services as they're being developed and deployed. We also see standards as being a key tool for promoting innovation within the AI sector. And this is because they allow the sharing of best practices, for instance, which are created by industry-led experts, but also they allow, as I mentioned, the interoperability of products, which can help with market access and uptake, and also offer consumers like more products that are better and also accessible across different jurisdictions. We also noticed in our plan for digital regulation that standards can provide tools, non-regulatory tools to support traditional regulation. And this can help us with ensuring that we have a proportionate and agile approach to regulate digital technologies. This is particularly important for AI because we want to ensure that we remove any unnecessary burdens to allow for innovation, but also that we have an approach that is flexible enough to adapt to the changes of the technology as it will change dramatically over the next few years. We are also committed to take a global approach to AI standards, which was highlighted also by Sahar and Tim. We're working very closely with international partners to think about how we work together to shape technical standards in a way that is aligned with our key shared values. And this is something that we're taking forward, for example, as part of the international research and collaboration under the AI Standards Hub. But we're also very focused on making sure that we have strong connection and engagement with our domestic partners, such as the British Standards Institution, which are supporting us, and we're very grateful to them for it, with strengthening our engagement in global standards development organizations. Next slide, please, Tim. So here are some of the key approaches that shaped our approach to AI standards. Those are some of the strategic frameworks that we set over the past few years and really highlighted, it really helped us define out this pro-innovation and international approach to global AI standards. So first, during the UK presidency of the G7, we committed to stronger international collaboration with G7 partners, but also beyond the G7, to make sure that we work together to establish an industry-led and multi-stakeholder approach to develop standards for digital technologies. Secondly, in the integrated review and the plan for digital regulation, we committed to use technical standards as I mentioned, as non-regulatory tools to support traditional regulation and also reduce regulatory burdens where possible. And then more recently, in the National AI Strategy and in the Digital Strategy, we really noted the role of technical standards to allow effective governance of AI. And this is because in the National AI Strategy, we committed to a full review of the AI governance landscape, which included reviewing how we regulate AI, how we can use technical standards in this approach, but also how we can make sure to build a very strong AI assurance ecosystem in the UK. And of course, all of these elements taken together are very important for the topic of today, which is trust in AI. We need a strong assurance ecosystem to provide testing and certification for AI systems that can provide consumers with trust about how they work. But also, in order for that to work, we need technical standards to lay the foundations and benchmarks against which we can test AI systems, for example. Next slide, please. So here are some of the key commitments that we made in the National AI Strategy under the third pillar, which is governing AI effectively, that are very relevant for AI standards. So the first one, as I mentioned, is our work on AI assurance, which is led by the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, which is also part of DCMS in the UK government. In particular, back in December, they published the AI Assurance Roadmap, which committed to basically develop an overview of how we're going to build an effective AI assurance ecosystem in the UK. And of course, you recognize the role of technical standards, as I mentioned, to provide some of the foundation really for this AI assurance ecosystem to work in practice. Secondly, in July this summer, we published the AI regulation policy paper, which came from the Office for AI. And this laid out our pro-innovation approach to regulating AI. In particular, it looked at setting cross-sectoral principles for AI, such as transparency, safety, and fairness, but also thinking about how we can actually implement the approach in practice, working with both industry and regulators. And in that policy paper, we also recognize the critical role that technical standards and assurance tools can play in making sure that we can implement AI principles in practice. And then, of course, finally, we also launched the AI Standards Hub last month, which is looking at growing the UK multi-stakeholder engagement in the development of global AI standards. So as I mentioned, we are looking, as Sahar mentioned, we are looking at the international picture. So mostly like standards that are being developed in global STOs such as ISO and IC, but also IEEE, and also thinking about how we engage not just industry, but like all the stakeholders that are relevant in these discussions in the UK. So this includes regulators, civil society, and also academia and research. Next slide, please. Here, I just wanted to take a step back, really, because I think it's really important to think about how AI standards can help us achieve with trust when we like position them in the wider picture of AI governance and the different layers that make up AI governance. So next slide, please. So if we start from the top of this diagram, we start from the setting of global AI principles. In recent years, we saw a lot of work happening in multilateral fora and global organizations such as the OECD or UNESCO, who developed principles for trustworthy AI, such as, again, fairness, transparency, and safety. Those tend to be very high-level principles that reflect the societal values and expectations that we have for how we would like to see AI systems being developed and used as they interact with society. However, when we speak about technical standards, we tend to move towards the bottom of this paragraph, of this graph. So we're thinking about the practical implementation of some of these principles in practice. There are different ways to go about this. One way is to go for regulation, which can be horizontal or vertical. So horizontal regulation can set horizontal requirements for dealing with particular characteristics of AI and addressing risks. And an example of this could be the AI policy paper that I mentioned before, where we laid out cross-sectoral principles addressing particular characteristics and risks of AI. But we can also take a vertical approach, thinking about the specific requirements for AI applications and their applications across different sectors. An example of this could be the application of AI to medical devices, where it's, of course, very important that both regulatory requirements and standards work in tandem to establish clear requirements such as product safety requirements that will need to be achieved before the products are deployed in the market. And then international standards, really, like across this whole picture, I think it can be said that they play a dual role. So they can be seen as both a standalone governance tool that can help providers and organizations and AI developers around the world to think about what are some of the best practices to address emerging AI risks, especially as we have uncertainty in particular areas where AI regulation is still developing or lacking. But also technical standards can be seen as a tool to support AI regulation, as they can help clarify some of the legal and regulatory requirements that apply to industry. So for instance, again, specifying how we can achieve safety and transparency in practice. What does it mean when we develop and deploy an AI system? Next slide, please. So really, I think this is a great time to be talking about this, because as Tim mentioned, there's a lot of work happening at the international level to develop AI standards. Most of the standards at the moment are under development, but it's clear that they will play an increasing role in determining how AI technologies are developed, used, and also governed in society. Most of these standards, as I mentioned, are being developed at the international level, so organizations like ISO and IC and IEEE. And there are also different types of technical standards that can help us address AI risks across the AI lifecycle. So we go from, they span, for instance, from foundational standards, which can help stakeholders set some common terminology around AI concepts such as transparency, for example. And they go towards also helping us to assess, measure, and manage specific AI risks, such as bias. An example of how standards could work in practice is if we think, for instance, about the risk of having a bias system being used into hiring practices. So if we have like some bias in the AI system that might lead to the discrimination of certain people with certain characteristics, then we might see how it is important that we have a way to ensure that this bias is not present in the AI system before the damage is done, before it's deployed. So really, like, some of these AI standards can help us address this by providing, for example, guidance to organizations in terms of like how to identify and address and mitigate bias across the AI system lifecycle, but also they can help with identifying potential sources of bias by providing guidance on how to achieve explainability and transparency to understand how the system is making decisions. Next slide, please. So I covered some of the benefits that standards provide for AI governance throughout the presentation, but I just wanted to wrap it up in one single slide. So as I mentioned, technical standards are very important for interoperability, and that can help us with ensuring that we encourage innovation, growth, and also R&D within the AI ecosystem. This is because technical standards can help us, for instance, achieve interoperability across multiple jurisdictions. And also, when we have different regulatory requirements, they can provide a common layer of requirements that allow people to comply with both domestic and international regulations without having to comply with like many different specific technical requirements. And they can, of course, also support conformity assessments by providing benchmarks and measurements for testing and certifying AI systems. So independently of how AI standards are used in regulation, which can be both in a more formal way, for instance, going down the designation route or the harmonized standards route in the EU, and this is the approach that the AI Act in the European Union, for example, is taking, where they recognize technical standards as offering a presumption of conformity with regulatory requirements. Or we can take a more light approach and just like recognize them as like tools providing good practices without designating specific standards to regulatory requirements. Independently on how they're used in regulation, it's important to remember that they remain voluntary tools. So they just offer one of the possible ways that stakeholders can use to achieve compliance with AI governance principles and regulatory requirements such as transparency and fairness. Next slide, please, team. And I wanted to conclude just with a quick note on why some of the work that we're doing together with BSI, NPL, and the Alan Turing Institute is so important in this landscape. I really believe that the AI Standards Hub will be incredibly important to set a very strong layer for our pro-innovation approach to AI governance. And this is because it will, on the one hand, encourage more people in the UK to take part of the conversations leading standards development at the global level, which will help us ensure that UK values and views from different stakeholders in society are reflected in how AI standards and technologies are developed and deployed globally. And secondly, by increasing the use, by seeking to increase the use of technical standards in the UK for AI, it will help us ensure that we can also increase public trust in that technology, as it will provide people with good practices for ensuring that AI systems perform as intended and are safe and reliable and transparent. Next slide, please. Sahar already covered some of the 4 key pillars of the AI Standards Hub, but I just wanted to provide the link to the AI Standards Hub here. As I mentioned, this launched last month on the 12th of October. It's now open for everyone to access. It's online. So please go and have a look and let us know what you think. And we're really keen to engage with as many stakeholders as possible on this to understand how we can make sure that the AI Standards Hub pilot is as effective as possible, but also understand what are some of the areas that we might want to take forward to address emerging stakeholders' needs during the pilot phase. Thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Tim.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Stop sharing. Thank you. So, just want to sort out the Q&A. So we've had a couple of questions come in, one which Sahar has already answered. But so please keep sending through your questions. As I mentioned right at the very beginning, we won't be speaking for an hour and a half as on the agenda. We'll just spend 10 or so minutes, depending on questions, answering them, and then close it off before the hour and a half. So the question that has come through, which is one for more for Sahar and I, which is how far is AI in the works in BSI, and and a question about the Smart Standards project. I mean, I'll answer the first part, then Sahar can cover the next one, if that's okay. So in terms of AI in BSI, so AI is hugely important for all organizations, will be important for all organizations. And that means that we're doing a lot of work to address the market for AI in terms of the work that we're doing around the AI Standards Hub, standardization, and investment in that from that side, and also across the wider BSI. But equally, as an organization itself, BSI is investing heavily in AI because it's going to change the way that we work and how we can serve our customers. So there's time, I'm not sure how much that is in public domain, so I don't want to talk about it on here, but I would suggest that all organizations, no matter what size or what sector, need to be investing in AI to ensure their organization meets their objectives in the future. Sahar, can you come in on the smart standards one, please?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for the question. I think I would reiterate that this is really smart, for those who aren't familiar with it, is sort of an approach to try and enhance the user experience and the way that users access standards and use them. And SMART really stands for standards that are machine readable, accessible, and interpretable. And what that basically means is that at the moment, standards are primarily documents that can be read by users or can be sort of, seen as guidelines. And there usually is, in some cases, a little bit of operation by the user to input that into their own systems. So for instance, if they're working in a factory or if they're using software to do calculations or specifications. So the idea of SMART is to try and enhance that rich format of the standard so that it is readable by a machine. So sections are enriched, there will be sort of data underpinning them so that machines can take those sections based on the requirements and use them and input them. And that then enhances the accessibility standard and makes it more usable for these industries. Now, as Tim said, this is really early stage at the moment, and it's really important to note that not all standards need to be smart. In most cases, the standard needs to be actually accessible for people who don't have those systems or don't want to utilize systems. So a small percentage of standards may become smart. And at this phase, there's pilot activities happening on seeing how and what best the processes of SMART can be used. Because as you can expect, there will be a lot of analytics going forward, and depending on user requirements, those data needs to be enriched within a certain way. I know that ISO and IC are carrying out some activities on testing, but the primary note I would make is that this really depends on how users utilize standards. So the more we understand how standards are being used, the better we can ensure that the standards that we create and the format we present are more beneficial to industry. Thanks.
Thank you, Sahar. So the next question we've got in is a very hard one. So how will you embed ethical use of AI in military equipment? And I can provide some thoughts on this, but Rebecca or Sahar, do you want to come in on that one at all?
I'll start and I'll sort of let Rebecca decide how she wants to discuss this one. But I think a primary focus, I would say, is that BSI, we do interact quite a lot with the MOD, but also with other defense departments and with NATO. And the reason we do this is because a lot of the standards they use are the similar standards that everyone else is using. So primarily, we want to make sure that standards are usable, worthy, and ethical for everyone, and everyone can utilize that and take advantage of that. So a lot of the defense standards are civilian standards and standards that we have within our portfolio. So I would say that the basis of that is very similar to what everything, all the standards are within this catalog. But they are key stakeholders in developing standards as well, and what they can bring also is beneficial to other industries. So there is scope here of sharing practice and utilizing their knowledge in emerging technology just as much as any other industry.
I'll come in next and then see if Rebecca wants to add anything. I mean, just to sort of emphasize or build on what Sahara said. I mean, as I was going through, I mentioned the work that's happening around standards portfolio, around governance, risk management, use of data, testing of systems, and having sort of widely used standardization that is accepted to ensure that some of the right questions are asked and that systems do what they are supposed to do. The other thing I would say in terms of some of the things around AI and military equipment is some of that sits above standardization and probably outside, Rebecca answered herself, but outside sort of DCMS remit and is intra-government along with other military associations. So some of that wouldn't be within the standard system and how that is used, I would expect. Rebecca, do you have any views on it?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think this is defense in particular is a bit outside of my remit, as it is under the portfolio of the Ministry for Defense, so the MOD. But we did publish the National Defense AI strategy back in summer. So I recommend to go and have a look at that document. And as part of the objectives in the defense, oh God, so many acronyms in the National Defense AI strategy. We're thinking about what are some of the key challenges that stakeholders in defense are currently facing for ensuring that we also incorporate global responsible AI into how we assess and address threats, for instance. I think similarly to some of the challenges that we face when thinking about access to AI standards, there are similar challenges in terms of making sure that the people who are engaged with AI in defense have the right skills and knowledge to understand what are the technical implications of utilizing AI for defense purposes, but also what are some of the ethical impacts and societal impacts that that can bring to society. And as part of that commitment, there's one particular objective which will look at how we also shape the global ecosystem for AI, and especially from a safety perspective, of course. And thinking about how we work, for instance, with international partners, but also with standards development organizations to think about how we can improve AI safety and also make sure that we incorporate ethical considerations into the deployment of AI for defense purposes. But yes, basically, I would just recommend to go and read the document. It's a bit lengthy, but very interesting read. It's available on gov.uk.
Thank you, Rebecca. So if you have any more questions, please keep sending them through. So a quick question from me. I mean, obviously, the hub's been live for a few weeks now. From your perspective, both Sahara and Rebecca, which type of users do you think are getting most benefit from the hub, and which part of the hub is getting most value to them? Sahara, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think the hub is really, in my view, that the huge value it brings is that community and that collaboration element to it. And I think that would be really interesting to have as many people interact and share what they're doing, what their success stories have been, but what their challenges have been also. And I'm hoping that there will be so much interaction within the hub that we could really learn from each other and how standards are being used and how they can benefit stakeholder groups, and open up the conversation about standards utilization and participation more to maybe those new entrants that are still not confident enough to pick up a standard and use it. And they see within that forum that it is something that would benefit them, and they can try and utilize some of this existing best practice for themselves. So I think I'm most excited about that, bringing together this community of people that want to utilize and yeah, use standards.
Yeah, and I think I'll maybe come in on that as well. I think it would be useful to think about why are we doing this, why we started the AI Standards Hub. This is because our problem statement was that we noticed that the lack of like multi-stakeholder engagement in how standards are being developed, and this is particularly important for AI because, of course, in recent years we're seeing like so much public attention on the impact that AI can have on society, and of course how it relates to how it's used and developed in the first place. So really, because technical standards play a key role to set out these best practices and requirements to like achieve some of the objectives for transparency and safety, it's important that we also reflect societal values, not just coming from the industry, but also coming from civil society organizations, coming from regulators, coming from academia, into how technical standards are developed, because that will affect how the technology itself is developed. And I think one of the historical challenges really in standardization is that we tend to see mostly participation by industry and like big corporation. And this is because there's a lack of resources and knowledge most times from smaller players such as SMEs or civil society organizations who don't have the tools or like technical knowledge needed to effectively engage with standards development processes. So really, I think the key function of the hub will be around community engagement. We're really trying to think about how do we increase access to these conversations and bring different stakeholders' views into it. This is something that is very important for BSI objectives, as Sahar described in her presentation, but also our government objectives, of course, and like making sure that we reflect UK values in how technical standards are developed. And to do this, we need to make sure that people actually know how to effectively engage with these conversations, how they can use standards in their own business endeavors. And really, we are just, I think the main function of the hub will be to create this coordination across different stakeholders to share, so they can share their views about what they think is needed in terms of like trustworthy AI across the different characteristics and how this can translate into AI standardization.
Thank you. I mean, so I'll reiterate what Sahar says well about how we focus on those underrepresented stakeholders. And on to that point, one of the things I'm most keen on around the hub is actually some e-learning we've done, which will, I know lots of people on the call are very familiar with standardization, but we developed some e-learning modules and rolling more out around trying to really help people who know about AI but don't know about standardization make their own way into the system. So the next, what I think I might do, I'll ask one last question. I think one of the questions come through online, I might answer directly rather than here. So the last question for the three of us, sort of looking forward, I mean, what role will standards and regulation play in the governance of AI in the future? I'm probably thinking this from a sort of global perspective as well. Rebecca, do you want to come in first on that one?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, what role standards and regulation will play in the governance of AI? So I think it's something that we are focusing on, as I mentioned, like in recent years, and this is because the technology that AI has been developed and like used for a very long time. But just recently, we're starting to focus about what are the implications of having AI systems interacting with us across different aspects of society and with our daily lives. And really, like, we're trying to like focus more about what are some of the novel risks that AI as a technology poses to society because of its characteristics of being autonomous and adaptable as well. So I think regulation is a key way that we will need in order to make sure that like the high risks that AI poses to society are addressed. I think the tricky question there is always, what is the right balance? How do we make sure that we have the right rules in place to defend people against like the risks of AI and also defend our fundamental values, but also without hindering innovation? Because at the end of the day, that is like a key element that will help us thrive in the AI global landscape, will help economic growth. And I think it's important to strike the right balance between these two elements in order to have the right opportunities while making sure that we defend against the key concerns. So regulation will play a key role there also in terms of providing certainty, because I think at the moment there's a lot of confusion in the general landscape of AI in terms of like what are the specific requirements that apply to AI, how does it differ from other digital technologies, what are some of the requirements that people need to comply with in order to ensure that their AI systems is trustworthy. And it will also help us because of that to establish public trust. So if we have specific requirements that people are accountable for, then we might help with making sure that people can trust how AI systems are being developed and deployed, to understand how they're being used as well, like through transparency requirements, for example. But also it creates, I think, accountability within the ecosystem. So thinking about who are the main actors that will need to comply with these requirements and how we can work with regulators to implement that approach in practice. And I think standards in that sense are can serve as like an additional layer to this approach. So they can provide more detail in terms of like how to achieve these principles in practice than we can do in regulation. So it's very unlikely that we will have like, like very lengthy descriptions of how to achieve fairness and transparency across different sectors in one AI bill or regulation. So I think standards, and we're seeing these across emerging approach to AI governance regulations like the EU AI Act, for example, but also the NIST risk management framework in the UK, can provide that level of detail to guide stakeholders about understanding how to achieve trustworthy AI in practice, really. And I think they can also really help with international collaboration and interoperability, because they tend to be an overarching layer that we have on the top of regulation. So even if we have different regulatory requirements developing across different jurisdictions, if we have technical standards as a supporting structure to match some of the general global AI governance principles that we all agree with, like transparency, and safety, then technical standards can provide that common language and layer that we can use to make sure that even if there are different regulations, we have common requirements that are the same for everyone. And that can really help with the uptake of the technology as well across borders.
Thank you, Sahar. Just coming for final comments.
Thank you, Tim. I think it's a huge thank you to Rebecca for that really, really, really detailed and useful description of how standards and regulation work together. I think I'll just take this point to just really thank and highlight the value that Rebecca brings to this ecosystem, because I think lots of, we have a great ambassador in government for standards, the role of standards within Rebecca. And I think that's really rare and really valuable for us. And I think her knowledge of the standards world and what benefit it can bring in collaboration with regulators and government really is hugely valuable. And I think that knowledge and understanding that government has of how policy and how regulation can really help identify what that minimum requirement is, and the role that then standards have to identify how businesses can meet and understand how they can reach those outcome requirements is hugely valuable. And I think that really shows the importance of the National Standards Body working closely with government on something like this, because standards and regulation really can work very well together, and they can help really clarify the landscape for businesses, but also for consumers as well. They can make sure that where there is requirements and market failures, the regulation provides that boundaries that must not be crossed, but then how businesses can make sure that they change their behaviors, implement better decision making, how they can make sure that trust is embedded in their system, that then the standard can really help do that. A standard, especially that we've discussed, that is a dynamic, it can adapt to how the technology is progressing. That's really beneficial, and that's something that regulation really can't do. Regulation, once it's set, it's a really difficult thing to create. It takes time. It needs to be laid down in front of Parliament, and so having that opportunity to be able to set something through regulation, but then the standard adapt according to how the market is using that technology is really helpful. And also, I think Rebecca really pointed this out, and it's critical, is how international this technology is and this landscape. And we don't want to create a sort of environment where UK businesses are shut out of, international opportunities or international trade and international supply chains because regulation is is mitigating some form, or that they can't adapt to other regulatory environments, or they have to create different technologies for different regulatory requirements. All of these is a huge burden for businesses. And so again, having that sort of government and regulators being able to reach out to standards where that can be looked at as an international solution is really, really helpful as well. And I think, my real summary I would give is the huge value that this relationship will have in making sure that the governance system around this emerging space allows for all these different needs and requirements.
Thank you very much, Sahar. I think that sounds like a perfect point to close off today. There are a couple of questions which I will put answers to, written answers down to. But once again, thank you very much, Sahar, and thank you very much, Rebecca, for a very interesting conversation. And thank you all for attending today.